I'm a professor of history.
Hi everyone, welcome to another Sex Week event. We're really glad that you're here. And we have a panel, a roundtable session on the ethics of pornography. You all know about it, that's why we're here. And we're going to start off by introducing our four esteemed panelists. We're really excited to hear what they have to say. So Maggie Mayhem, on my far left, is an independent erotic film producer and performer. Her path to porn began in 2004 when she started work as a free and anonymous HIV tester and counselor at the University of California, Santa Cruz. In 2006, she served as the clinic coordinator as the chancellor's intern, and after graduating in 2007, she relocated to the Bay Area and was the HIV senior specialist at the Larkin Street Youth Services. In 2009, she was awarded a grant to perform HIV prevention and treatment in Tanzania. Her work, listening to hundreds of personal narratives about her sexuality, identity, desire, and community, reframes the notions of stigma sexuality. She and her fiancé maintain their own website and produce tech consultation and web development to other independent performers.
And now, second from our left is Carolyn Bronstein, who is an associate professor of media studies in the College of Communication at DePaul in Chicago, where she teaches undergraduate and graduate courses that examine the social and cultural effects of mass communication in a global society. She is an award-winning scholar whose research investigates questions of media representation and social responsibility, with an emphasis on gender, and she is particularly interested in the efforts of citizens groups and grassroots organizations to reform the news and entertainment media. Bronstein is the author of Battling Pornography, the American Feminist Anti-Pornography Movement, 1976 to 1986, which analyzes the rise and fall of anti-pornography activism in the modern women's movement, discovering its origins in the turbulent social and cultural history of the late 1960s and 1970s. Battling Pornography has been named the winner of the 2002 Emily Toth Award of the Popular Cultural Association for the best book in women's issues in popular American culture. Her research has been published in a wide range of interdisciplinary journals, such as Violence Against Women, Camera Obscura, and Journalism and Mass Communication Quarterly. Bronstein earned her BA and MA degrees in communication from Stanford University and a PhD in journalism and mass communication from the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Next, we have Dr. Gail Dines, a professor of sociology and women's studies at Yale College in Boston, where she's also the chair of the American Studies Department. She's been researching and writing about the porn industry for well over 20 years. Dr. Dines is the co-editor of the best-selling textbook Gender, Race, Class, and Media, and she has written numerous articles on pornography, media images of women, and representations of race in pop culture. She is the recipient of the Meyer Center Award for the study of human rights in North America. Her latest book is Porn Man: How Porn Has Hijacked Our Sexuality.
Dr. Claire Potter, our moderator, is a professor of history and American studies at Wesleyan University and a visiting professor of history at the New School for Public Engagement in New York City. She specializes in United States political history, queer studies, and the history of gender, sex, and feminism. She is the author of War on Crime, Bandits, G-Men, and the Politics of Mass Culture. Her article, Queer Hoover, Sex, Lies, and Political History, published in the Journal of History of Sexuality, was awarded the 2007-2008 Audrey Lorde Article Prize by the Committee on Lesbian and Gay History of the American Historical Association. At present, she is working on a book about feminist and federal anti-pornography campaigns in the late 20th century United States, Sex and Public Feminism, the Reagan Revolution, and the Politics of Pornography, 1968 to 1990. So now we'd briefly like to discuss why Sex Week decided to introduce a roundtable discussion on pornography. And basically, we've seen a lot of discussion, the 1,000 op-eds that Sex Week has spawned, and other ensuing controversies. And we'd really like to try to offer a diversity of opinions to help students shape their own informed opinions. And as we all know, I think on some level, pornography is a pervasive commodity on campus and in society, and it has tremendous impacts on our platonic and sexual relationships. We would also additionally like to model a form of civil discourse about how we can work out these really profound and personal differences that we find with regard to pornography and, frankly, everything to do with sex.
Great, and so we'll turn it over here to our moderator, Potter. Thanks very much.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming on a late Saturday afternoon, and I think on behalf of the panel, I would like to thank the organizers for bringing us here. Carolyn and I are old friends. I have never met Maggie or Gail, but it's a privilege to do so. I think you can have a lively discussion here today. This is how we're going to do it. Each panelist is going to get 3 minutes at the beginning of the panel to introduce themselves and their work on pornography. You've heard a short bio, but to give them a chance to make a statement that is unfettered by any other question or context. And I hope that you will use these statements to have some context for interpreting the agreements and disagreements that might emerge later in the panel. Then I'm going to ask questions. I have a number of questions. They may shift a little bit depending on what direction the discussion goes in. And when I ask a question, I'm going to give each panelist the opportunity to answer for no more than 5 minutes. If it looks like we're beginning to fall into discussion, that's fine, but we don't want any one issue to hijack a question or any one position. Now, before we get started, I'd like to say 2 things. One of the nice things about being a scholar is you read all the time, and when you're coming to an event like this, every once in a while something leaps off the page, as if given to you by the goddess. And that's what happened to me when I was taking notes the other day from an essay I was reading by Sarah Evans, who is really sort of one of the original women's historians, civil rights activist, a peace activist, and a radical feminist from way back. And Sarah Evans argues in this essay that the first task of feminism back in the 1960s was for women to learn to speak out, to hear their own voices, saying the things that they really believe. That task of speaking out remains, Evans says, but should be coupled to an equally feminist task of listening. This means, as Evans says, quote, to listen well and to learn to understand, which is not the same thing as agreeing with interests and points of view unlike our own. All right? So I'd like to convey the notion of this feminist task of listening as well as the feminist task of speaking out. And I'd like to ask us to be aware of something else, which is the capacity for conversations about pornography to polarize into good and bad, pro and anti. And I'd like to suggest that we work as hard as we can to avoid categorizing other people as anti-pornography or pro-pornography. One of the big issues that Carolyn writes about and that I'm working with is that feminists who oppose the anti-pornography movement did not think of themselves as necessarily pro-pornography, okay? And they didn't call themselves that, nor in fact, and this is the other pair of words that shows up in documents all the time, pro-sex and anti-sex. All right, I'd like to avoid those characterizations as well, because they don't really tell us much. This is a very nuanced issue, as you're going to hear from our panelists. And I think if we can avoid that and work towards some other language, we'll begin to sort out what are the issues that are at stake for all of us in this. Okay, so since I'm starting with speaking and listening, I'd like to begin with the use of the word pornography itself. And I'm wondering how we're using this word, pornography, and whether we ought not to be making distinctions within the category of pornography. Now it's time for the panel to listen hard. What counts? What counts as good pornography? What counts as bad pornography when it comes to legal sexual materials that are available in consumer culture? Can we distinguish between pornography and feminist erotica, as women often did in the 1970s and 1980s? Can we distinguish between pornography that might, in the 1950s and 60s, have been called obscene, and images that depict relatively conventional and consensual homo and heterosexual behaviors. Can we distinguish between that kind of conventional sex depiction and pornography that depicts rape and other forms of violence? And finally, can we distinguish between pornography and the often highly sexualized images that proliferate in consumer culture, such as food porn, music videos, television, how-to books about sex in Christian marriage, which are extremely explicit, Cosmo. So how do we make these distinctions between pornography and these kinds of sexual images that actually we take for granted and sometimes don't even see? All right, I know that was a lot.
3 minutes, you said.
3 minutes.
I can certainly do that. So again, my name is Maggie Mayhem. It's so great to be here today, and I am involved in the pornographic film industry. I do not have conventional means of getting there. In so many ways, I'm probably the least likely candidate one could imagine to have gone into pornography. I grew up as a geek, certainly a nerd. I was not invited to prom. I went to my first high school formal in drag. I was a late bloomer, and I went on to college, and I got very involved in harm reduction and sex ed. And I was constantly being exposed to information that was constantly changing my paradigms of sexuality in regards to what is the male gaze, what is the female gaze, what is our experience with desire. And hearing these narratives in such a vulnerable place really opened my mind to see that there was more to sexuality than the story I was being told in either my university classrooms, in my media, within my family, and my culture, that there was an actual vulnerability with people and narratives that needed to get out. After I graduated, I went on to more formal work, and I was presented with a very strange and unusual opportunity to go and shoot some video porn. And when I initially made that decision, I did so because I thought it was an opportunity to immortalize my own youth and to express the autonomy of my own desire. I believe that we have diminished women's autonomy and sexuality, and we have said that there is one gaze, the patriarchal gaze, and I am here, if nothing else, to disrupt that gaze and to say that my own sexuality and desire is legitimate and that I have a great constitutional amendment, the First Amendment, that allows me to go up and say what I think is happening with sexuality. Over time, my relationship to pornography has gone through great changes. I've been a little bit more politicized in the porn that I'm making and producing. My relationship to the industry is slightly different. For the most part, I do not work, actually not even for the most part, I do not work within the Los Angeles, San Fernando Valley. I'm working to redefine the parameters of pornography in a completely different setting and different rules, and hopefully I will be able to affect real cultural change in the way that porn is produced and received.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Bronstein. As you heard, I'm a professor of media studies, and my work on pornography is historical for the most part, and my new book follows citizen activist groups, feminist groups, from the period of 1976 to 1986, and their efforts to protest the proliferation of pornography throughout American society in the 1970s and the 1980s, and follows this movement from its roots in consumer boycott, picketing, political protest, letter writing campaigns, all the way through to a change in strategy, a change to try to introduce new laws in the United States that would have made pornography, specific pieces of pornography, actionable as a violation of women's civil rights. So my book kind of traces this change in the movement over time. I have different and conflicting views about pornography depending on the day. I'm extremely sympathetic to the work that the anti-pornography feminists did, particularly in the earlier parts of the movement. But I also am very critical of the way that the movement changed over time as it moved into the early 1980s and coalesced around coalesced around opposition to sexual images, losing the earlier focus on violent images. So as the movement kind of goes across that decade, you have more and more of an emphasis on sex, and you lose the emphasis on violence. So my personal predilection is I'm more sympathetic to the earlier parts of the movement that were opposed to images of sexual violence, not just explicit sex. And I think there really is a difference there, and I see a difference there in pornography today between violent images and what are just sexual, and to me, just sexual images. So again, my position kind of shifts day to day. I was motivated to write this book because I think that the work that these early activist groups did was phenomenal, was just an incredible testament to citizens' ability to stand up and say, we want to change the media environment. We want to fight back against corporate media images. We want to say in how our bodies are represented, how our bodies are used in media. So I personally am so moved by what these early citizen groups achieved. I'm probably running out of time, but one of the most amazing to me chapters that these groups engaged in was they took on this one tiny little group of feminist activists in the 1970s took on Warner Communications, and they took on the Rolling Stones. And they said, we're not going to stand back and listen to the Rolling Stones lyrics and advertising that shows actual violence against women. So if you can think of activists taking on the Rolling Stones in a decade before email, before faxes, before freely available, like easily available long-distance telephone calls, et cetera, it's mind-blowing to me what dedicated activists can do. So I guess I will leave it there and tell you I'm essentially a historian of anti-pornography efforts.
Thank you. Well, I came to this through a different route, really. I did my PhD in England. I did all my degrees in England in sociology. And when I went to school in England, there was no way you could come out of a PhD in sociology and not be a Marxist. I mean, that was just, you couldn't do it. So when I discovered Marx, critical theory, it was like the world made immediate sense to me. The understanding of how structural power works, structural inequality, the notion that you've got different class interests. And what was very powerful was Marx's idea of how those that control the means of production, i.e. the world, also control what he called the mental means of production, the way you think. And through this I began to understand how ideology works and the notion that those in power need to get inside your head. They need to creep into your head and set up camp, because it's really a pain to have to control you with a gun all the time. It's much easier if they can control you through the brain. And then I stumbled into pornography. And it was purely by accident. Somebody said to me, there's an anti-porn activist from America coming. Do you want to see a slideshow? Why not? It was like my life changed that day. I had never seen anything like it. Given I was sheltered, and I couldn't believe, A, that men made these images, and B, that other men found them arousing. It was like, how have I missed this? I mean, I understand patriarchy, but nothing explained patriarchy to me like pornography. There it was, crisp, clean, succinct, unambiguous. And so I began to, when I was doing my doctorate, apply a Marxist theory of culture to pornography, and that's what my dissertation was on. And now what I do is I study the industry. My interest as a political economist, schooled in the Marxist way of thinking, is how does industries shape the way we live? What is the connection between the material reality of our lives and the lived experience? And this is where I think about the food industry shapes the way we eat. Yes? The fashion industry shapes the way we dress. So how would it be possible that the sex industry did not shape the way we had sex? That would mean pornography is the only industry that has no effect. All other industries do, but somehow pornography is exempt. So what I'm interested in is more, when I look at pornography, and when you said interesting about rape in pornography, there's virtually no rape in pornography. Women never say no. In fact, women in pornography don't have the word no. Right? There's no such word that goes around. So what I'm interested in is the violence, not rape, because there's very little rape, but the thing that looks like consensual sex, that actually is brutal, body punishing, and violent. And I'm interested in that thing called pornography that the porn industry produces. So, for example, if I was studying the car industry, I wouldn't spend hours really defining a car. I would accept that that thing with 4 wheels that drives and the car industry produces, it's a car. Same with porn. I accept if the porn industry produces it, if men consume it to jerk off to, and men make money from it, and they call it porn, it's good enough for me. I'm going with their industry. So that's my basic interest in all of this, is the political economy of pornography in a global capitalist patriarchal society.
Let me just sort of roll this back a little bit then, because I delivered a complicated series of questions that I think now are a little easier to take apart. And I think, Gail, you would say, if it's pornography, we don't need to bother distinguishing between good and bad, because
well, actually, good or bad, I'm more interested in the role that pornography plays in reproducing patriarchal and capitalist hegemony.
Okay, so do you think pornography is capable of playing any other role?
Well, I think you'd have to look at its politics of production. You'd have to look at how it's produced, who's in it, who's producing it, what is the socio-economic background of the people in it versus the people making it versus the people making money from it. You'd have to ask all these kinds of questions. Who's consuming it? How is it filtering into their ideology? Is it reaffirming certain ideologies? Is it changing? These are questions you ask. Yeah.
So let's kick that to the producer.
All right. I think it's really interesting how much media we encounter every day, and I think it is absolutely vital to take a look at how media influences the way we construct our ideas about our culture. And pornography does have an incredible, wealth of resources to get out there, but there's a lot of other media that we encounter. I think one of the most interesting things is to look at a lot of the Disney images. Disney is a multimedia, worldwide global conglomerate, and their total net assets are coming into the tune of $72 billion. That's an incredible amount of money, and that's in the hands of just one company. In regards to the way I developed as a young girl, I was looking at a lot of these images that portrayed women as the one who needs a white knight to come and rescue them, to help slay the dragon that they're facing, and that it requires someone to come in and assist you, that you are in danger, that you are the damsel in distress. And what I started to realize as I got a little bit older is that I had no interest in a white knight. I wanted his horse, and I wanted his sword, and I was going to slay my own dragon. That was my narrative. And as I look at the way that porn has been so often in the hands of men, I said, there's another gaze out there. I don't think that male desire is illegitimate. I think that desire is beautiful. I think that the infinite diversity of the human experience is one of the most amazing things about being able to be here on Earth and being able to look at all of these different dynamic angles. That said, no one perspective should ever be allowed to dominate the entire discourse. And right now we've moved to a place where that has happened. But what facilitated that? What came first? We know that misogyny, we know that sexism predates pornography. There's a root that needs to be examined. And I think that root goes back to some of the images that we are most exposed to, especially in our developmental ages. When we're very young, what does our children's programming look like? What do our nursery tales look like? And even though they don't have the same shock value, they carry on some very important lessons about what we should expect to be as we get older and we start to define maleness, femaleness, or whatever the spectrum of gender might actually turn out to be. So I took it as a chance to go in and say, my gaze is legitimate, and I'm going to show people what I have and how I think, and also being able to create an opportunity where I get to engage with my own fantasy and my own imagination and create images in a safe space where we can go ahead and look at some of the things that might be bigger or scarier out there. I have absolutely grown up, and I have been influenced and informed by the happenings of my context, some of which are disturbing, and some of which are scary, some of which are in my mind constantly. Anything that has the potential to be in our dreams has the potential to be in our nightmares as well as our own sexual desires. And oftentimes, it's so much to think about, and my sexuality is one of the ways in which I know and understand my world. And to be able to take an image sometimes that is scary, that comes into my mind, to be able to take that image and harness it under my control and work with people and say, I am not afraid of this, and I'm not afraid to walk out, and I can use it to empower me to go out and face the dragons that are out there in the world that are very real. So that's part of why I got into producing, and I would say that there is a very, very important reason to look at the means of production. a lot of the means of production right now, they are not ethical. There are things that I have seen that I believe are unconscionable, and that's why I'm here to fight it from the inside. And I think the greatest change can occur when you support the workers and the labor force themselves, and you go in and you look at the work that they're doing and you help support it. And right now there is not a lot of media attention that's going into the work that people are doing from inside the industry to disrupt it and the change that we're working. And it's a point in time where we're starting to look at a unique opportunity because the way we define the adult industry is changing. It's changing. I think that the means of control and power that used to be in the hands of studio producers are starting to distill, and it's starting to become a greater opportunity for there to be even more images. Rather than taking away images, I want to see more. I want to see bigger, better, greater images and more voices.
Okay, I want to kick this to Carolyn. I mean, one of the things I'm thinking is, of course, we don't see more criticism of the industry because Viacom and Disney are distributing everything, right? I mean, you know, there is a media environment that has taken hold of much of pornography, and I understand that you're saying we need to occupy the media and move out of that structure. But I want to kick this to Carolyn because, unless I'm mistaken, you and I have worked in the same archives. We could time travel back to 1979 in the Women's Center in Berkeley, and we could have had this same discussion, really, that women then were doing Marxist analyses of patriarchy and pornography's place in that. And women were also raising a lot of questions about the gaze. If women are producing it, if women find it erotic, if two lesbians are using it, is it really pornography? So can I kick that to you for some context?
Sure. I think maybe we could have definitely had part of that conversation. Certainly Gail's end of it we could have had. I think Maggie's end of it, the pornography industry just wasn't then what it is today. I mean, now it is a multinational corporation. It's just a huge stake of our capitalist economy. And back in that period, I mean, when my book begins, 1976, we're still talking about the heady golden age of pornography, where Deep Throat is 1972 is when Deep Throat appears, and porn is really just emerging. I mean, you're coming out of the era of stag films, and you're just starting to get the first mainstream X-rated films, and people are starting to see it for the first time. The next change that you have is in the early 1980s when you get the development of video technology, and that's where the industry begins to explode. Because, of course, in the 70s, there was a lot of risk to watching pornography. There was if you went to an adult theater, they were usually in seedy parts of town, and you exposed yourself to the risk of arrest. You expose yourself to the risk of being seen. Let's say you're a teacher or minister, a doctor. I mean, if somebody saw you there. So I think that the shape of the industry was so different then. So I don't know that we could have had Maggie's end of the conversation quite as well. But certainly that distinction between is there erotica, is there good pornography, was the crux of the movement throughout the 1980s, and the feminists who opposed the anti-pornography movement were very much, as Claire said, they weren't pro-pornography, but they wanted to be pro-erotica. They didn't want to close off the possibility for there to be positive sexual imagery. And the other thing I was thinking as our other two panelists were talking and about the question that Claire posed about, could there be good pornography? Are there good uses for pornography? Because that's where we began that question, right? So I was thinking about the anthropologist Gail Rubin, who's been really influential in my thinking about pornography. And in her very famous work, Thinking Sex, she creates this kind of series of charmed circles of sexuality. And she points out that the most charmed circle, that inner circle, is for sexuality in our society is heterosexual, married, procreative in terms of sexuality. And, I'll own it. I'm all three of those. So is my fellow panelists here. I won't speak for anyone else. And I think that it's very important to remember that charmed circle, that it's hard, that it's easy living sometimes in that charmed circle, because everything reinforces your sexuality, it empowers your sexuality, and congratulates your choices. Celebrates your wedding, celebrates when your baby's born, celebrates your heterosexuality and all of that. And then as you get into those external circles, it becomes harder and harder. You're not celebrated. You're denigrated. You have less opportunity. Your desires are perverse. are illegal at times. And so I'm very careful not to want to condemn pornography across the board, because I think that for sexual minorities who don't have the easiest time because they don't live in that charmed circle, pornography can be an incredibly powerful way of discovering their desire, naming desire, and finding a community of people who share that desire.
Yeah, I think one of the things I noticed about this panel is, of course, there's a really big missing person here, and that's a gay man.
Or anyone of colour.
Well, yes, or anyone of color, yes, that's true. But I was thinking about the ways in which pornography was seen as educative, often in gay men's communities, which was a hyper-criminalized environment for sexuality. But I want to jump off my script for a minute, because Gail has been sitting here making notes furiously, and I think she's got a lot of responses to what was being said, and I'd like to give you a little airtime to say those things.
It's really interesting. First of all, I think as a radical feminist, I think heterosexuality is anything but charming in patriarchy. It is the site at which most damage is done to women, and I think to suggest that if you're heterosexual, your views are somehow empowered, or your sexuality, is to miss, I think, some of the violence encoded into heterosexuality, which I know you know, because you've that stuff over time. So I think that, I would say, it's a big question mark over heterosexuality. I wouldn't make that argument. In terms of the industry, we could never have had this conversation pre-internet. Everything changed after the internet. And let me say something, when you study people who work in the industry, they all say the same thing. They say what's happening now in the industry is exactly what happened in Las Vegas. They say this is Las Vegas all over again. And what do they mean? When gambling started, you saw thousands of people go to Las Vegas, the small timers trying to hustle a living. What happened over a few years was the big boys came in and took over the major casinos. This is exactly what's happening now in pornography. Pornography is called, within business studies speak, a maturing industry. What that means is you do have lots of small players, there's no question, people like Maggie and other people. But in terms of the industry, this is not where the industry is at. The industry now is in the actual phase of conglomeration and monopolization. So you're having the big thing. Do you know, does anyone here know who the biggest porn mogul in the world is? Does anyone know the name of the person who makes more money from porn? Is size of a mogul. Do you know his name, Maggie? Do you know who it is? No?
No?
Anyone know who it is? Any guesses? Who's so wealthy, it's all from porn? Have you heard of a man called Fabian Thalmann?
Yes, I have.
Okay, he owns Manwin. Anyone heard of this? Right, because he's hidden. Am I right? He's hidden. He's 33-year-old guy, lives in Germany, and the actual industry that Manwin is in is incorporated in Luxembourg. This man is not only buying up all of paid porn, he also owns the top 4 free porn sites. So let me tell you something about free porn. It's not free. It's owned by the paid industry, and it's being used now to monetize free porn into paid porn. They've even done studies at how long each clip they put in should be in order to get guys to go from the free porn to the paid porn. And what they found is the optimum number is 3 to 5 minutes, because you stir the pot but don't seal the deal, so to speak. So you have to, in their desire to ejaculate and carry on masturbating, they go into paid porn. Manwin, which owns the free porn sites, increased last year its revenue by 40%. Okay, so free porn is actually creating a whole new consumer base for paid porn. Monetize is the name of the game today in porn. So it's an industry that you can't believe. Now, also, Rupert Murdoch at one point was making more money than any other living soul through his dummy satellite companies where he was actually promoting porn. So the issue about porn today is you have to think of them as businessmen, or I call them pimps in Armani suits, okay? They are extremely wealthy. They intersect with vulture capitalists, which is what's his name was calling them. Venture capitalists. I was about to say vulture capitalists. You know, that's the term that Newt Gingrich was using against Mitt Romney. So they intersect with venture capitalists, with banks, with credit card companies, with every sort of major industry, media industries. So this is what I think we need to talk about. What does it mean that the porn industry has gone from the back street to Main Street to Wall Street? How does that affect the way we think about it? How does that impact on our collective culture as a group? So why there are people like Maggie trying to do something else in porn, and I haven't seen your stuff, so I can't comment on that. Why there are other people, I'll say, who are trying to maybe disrupt the male gaze. The truth is, it's small potatoes. That's not where the discourse around sexuality is at today in late industrial capitalism. And I think if we do not take that on, then we are missing the huge elephant in the room.
Okay, I'm going to depart radically from my script because you put so much on the table here. I guess my question would be, and this is a real question, not a leading question, why would we focus our efforts on pornography rather than the mortgage industry?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, no, I believe in all of them. Sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, sorry. No, but I want to toss it down the table because it seems to me, we've moved very quickly to a macro discussion in which what she's talking about, by the way, around pornography getting into people's heads is called hegemony for any of you who have taken any courses on Gramsci, which is that we all sort of do all these things and buy and believe as if they were our own ideas, but they're actually not our own ideas. They were put there by the ruling classes. So because we've sort of ascended to this level, I guess the question would be, and I want to put it on the table in both ways, what is the damage that pornography does that means we need to address its conglomeration? And what is the good that pornography does that I think Maggie is also saying we need to address the conglomeration of pornography and the proletarianization of sex laborers? What is the harm? What is the good? And then maybe Carolyn can address that from a historical perspective.
Well, actually, the first company that I ever worked with in the porn industry was kink.com. And they are people who produce fetish and SM-oriented pornography. This is where I got my start. My first shoot that I ever did involved bondage, and my second shoot was for a website called publicdisgrace.com, and I went on to do work with electro things and pretty much the darkest, some of the dark and scary images, the ones that are the most scary to look at. And there was a big question of why I was in there doing that and why I was working on that, and a whole long discussion. I did come out of a place of curiosity and adventure. What I found when I was on that set was that I had a great, safe, protected experience on the set. Where I started to have difficulties were in the negotiating room as regards to business and being recognized as a business person in the room with a legitimate place to have a conversation. So physically I felt quite safe in everything I did. In many ways, I was a stunt actor. A lot of times we watch movies that have incredibly dangerous stunts. I have a cousin who's a stunt actor in Hollywood. She just got set on fire to go run across a screen and got some pretty decent burns. She doesn't have any eyebrows or eyelashes right now. I've always walked away with my eyebrows and eyelashes intact. My entire body intact, actually. So there's a chance for someone to go ahead and to explore and to bring a gift of doing something that's heavy. Is there damage to those images, to take a look at those images? I think it depends on whether or not the person participating in them has a recognized voice. And I think having the chance to come out and say, this is why I chose to come here and do this today. These are my interests. Aside from doing kind of the high adventure images that you might see, I'm also inclined to go do things like jump off 40-foot waterfalls. I did a lot of disaster relief in Haiti where I pushed my body to the very bone. I don't think I've ever had a more difficult, grueling, physically torturing experience in my life. It was manual labor every single day in 110 degrees with limited food options. And I have a lot of a personal reason why I went in to do that, and that's going to derail to go into my whole choice. But the point is it was choice. And it was a chance to go ahead and state the terms of how that engagement was going to happen on camera. I got a little bit more political when I had some more troubles in the background, and in fact I did confront kink.com for some of the imagery that they were producing, specifically around the notion of virginity. I was really appalled to see that they were going to be doing a shoot involving a real live, actual de-virginizing with someone who had never had sex before. And one of the probably most difficult things I've ever done is to write something publicly in regards to an employer. And when I published that piece, I knew that I was saying I will never be hired by this company ever again. And I understood that when I went into it. The result of my saying that as a performer is that a lot of the marketing was changed and a lot of attention went into the production standards at Kink. A lot of questions were inquired. Some people started going in there asking questions, taking a look, and it made the process more transparent. It made the process more transparent, and on a small level, even if it wasn't the big systemic porn industry, by speaking up, I made a difference on a shoot, and I made a difference on the way the images were being looked at, and there was a conversation about it. And I can also say that I was wrong. I thought I was never going to get hired by that company again, and as it turns out, I was. And that was a really surprising experience, to have a time where I got a call and I was told, if you want to come back, you're welcome. And I told them no. I went on and decided that's when I needed to go do business for myself. But I was very concerned with images, and it is something I played out, and I made it a point to speak my own mind before and after every shoot, and to account for myself and my reasons for being there that day. Those are the scary images, though, and I know that they are some of the biggest, most contentious ones because they do oftentimes take on the appearance of something violent, but I would say that they are not violent images. They are opportunities.
I am not sure that I still have the thread of the original question because we've gone all over the place. But I guess I would say, trying to respond to Gail a little bit, I am less persuaded by the idea that pornography as an industry is particularly heinous, when I think we live in a globalized society where we have many large industries that cause harm to human beings. I mean, I don't see why the pornography industry should be singled out for attack more than, say, the clothing industry for its use of sweatshops all over the less developed world, and the tremendous harms that are done to the young girls. I mean, you want to talk about harm to girls, the girls who sew all of our Gap and Banana Republic and Walmart clothing. Yeah, and then the article in the series in the New York Times just a couple of weeks ago about where our iPads and iPhones are made, and the story about a young person who lost 4 fingers, working because he or she hadn't been properly trained on the Apple manufacturing equipment. So I don't know why I would want to single out the pornography industry as an industry any better or any worse than any of our other large profit-making and profit-oriented industries. I think that in terms of harm, I'm more persuaded, Gail, by your arguments about the psychological manipulation of men and women today, young boys and young girls, and the fact that pornography is so pervasive that it does provide a limited number of mainstream pornography provides a limited number of sexual scripts to people who are trying to figure out, their burgeoning sexuality and their sexual identity. So I'm more persuaded, frankly, on that end than I am about the harms of the industry.
Okay, so I would completely agree. Like industries that harm people in the production of goods, definitely I've got them in my sight. But porn is really one of the few industries where the good is the human being. There is nothing produced in porn outside of the human body, the female and male, product which is bought and sold in the marketplace. Now, as much as Gap and all of those are awful, what's being bought and sold is actually clothing. Now, again, I believe the production process is horrible, but there has got to be something different in our heads. Believe the buying and selling of clothes versus the buying and selling of human beings. Did we not say that is wrong many years ago, right in this country, right? You made a decision in this country that buying and selling of human bodies is wrong. Now, let's talk about, we get to the point where we talk about sex work and and Marx said something. If you read Marx, what's so amazing is in that time he understood what was going to happen, and he said, capitalism is going to get into every part of your life. There's going to be nothing left. It's going to creep into every single crevice. And what I'm really pissed off with is how dare they creep into the crevice of our sexuality? How dare the capitalists come in, commodify sexuality, industrialize sex, which is what I'm talking about, and decide to shape it. So what I'm really saying is that all industries, I'm not going to support any industry. They're all about the dehumanization of human beings. But if we cannot distinguish what it means to work in porn, because however bad conditions are in other industries, post-traumatic stress disorder is not part of the job description. It is in pornography and prostitution. The level of PTSD in that industry, which is often a revolving door, is through the roof. And I'm sure you've got PTSD also in China where they're producing the iPads. But It is much greater in the sex industry. They say people who work in the sex industry have 4 times more PTSD than Vietnam or war veterans. That's an incredible amount. And I want to ask, what does it take to work in the sex industry? What level of dissociation? What level of removal from the self? And my argument would be that people who want to create a sexuality that is authentic and real, you're the ones who should be closing down the porn industry, not me. They're doing way more damage to you than I could ever do, because what they're doing is they're destroying an authentic sexuality. These should be your enemies, not the anti-porn feminists.
One of the, I mean, I don't think the anti-porn feminists are our enemies, right? I think we would,
right. People who take that label, they do come after us.
These are, of course, the words that I'm trying to take off the table.
But there's a material reality to that, I agree. But I'm just saying that. Me, for example, I'm all over the porn discussion boards and everything. So that is the reality of our lives, is that they come after us personally, they talk about us, they tell people where we live, they give all that. So there is a reality there. Yeah, they see us as an enemy.
Right. And these are not uncommon tactics in today's climate, actually, for opposing any kind of hierarchy in any way. I mean, it happens to people who try to unionize at Walmart, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so, but one of the things I'm interested in here then is, because this is a big issue, and maybe Carolyn would begin by speaking to this, is this question of what we mean by authentic sexuality. I mean, what would authentic sexuality be? And at the same time, I'd like to put another question on the table, which is, Maggie has made a number of statements about her own agency and her own voice, and so on and so forth. What do we mean by agency and voice? Okay, so how do we know what is authentic, and why would that matter?
Well, I think that, you know, this has been kind of a point of struggle for decades now, this idea that, is there an authentic sexuality? I mean, I think to some extent, it's determined by every person for him or herself. And these were some of the arguments that tore feminists apart in the 1980s in particular, because many feminists did try to establish boundaries as to what was a feminist sexuality. So a feminist sexuality was wholeness, integrity, circular, nurturing, not orgasm-focused, not penetrative. I mean, there's just try to find words to describe something that was a feminist sexuality. And then there were an awful lot of women that came around from the other side and said, that doesn't work for me. And you can't say that the way that I experience my sexuality is not authentic. You can't put labels on it and expect it to apply, expect those labels to apply for everyone. So I don't know that there really is an authentic sexuality outside of what each person determines for him or herself. But I do accept that, as Gail argues, that the external influence of a lot of the pornographic texts that we're exposed to today can play a role in creating beliefs and feelings and perceptions of desire that are perhaps not as authentic as one might hope.
There's definitely a lot to be said there. I think one of the first things to remember is that there's a difference between the buying and selling of bodies, which is what I believe better represents sweatshop labor, and the ability to sell images. When I go to work, I am selling an image of myself. I am selling my labor and my skill. And I do have a set of skills that are different from a lot of the people around me, and that's what attracted me to the industry. So I am selling an image of myself, and kind of like any image that you sell, the person who receives that image does have the power to take with it and reimagine it in any way they want. It's a death of the author kind of moment. So I think there is a death of the porn star moment when a fan watches or someone watches, because you get to have that lens and you get to see them and you get to reimagine them. But in that process, when you're engaging with that fantasy, I'm off living my own life and I'm off creating another image, and I get to have another experience and I get to create another fantasy. I think the big key thing is that porn is about creating fantasies and images for entertainment. Sexuality is about empathy. And that's been an important thing. And I think there's also a greater timeline of pornography that we need to take into consideration. Porn has not always been centered in America. And America does have a very large media conglomerate base, a huge corporate influence on all of our global industries. But porn was not born in the San Fernando Valley. some of the most compelling images I ever saw were actually coming out of Weimar, Berlin, Paris, France, and Shanghai, China. And all of these were incredibly, immensely diverse sexual communities where there was queerness, a lot of hardcore images that are coming from the very dawn of the motion picture industry. And these images do depict all kinds of things. In fact, a lot of what we still see today, there's really nothing new. As much as we might see more of it and we have more of a chance to interact with it, it's not wholly original. And it's going back beyond the 70s. It's going back to the 20s and 30s. And all of these thriving cultures were ostensibly shut down by fascism that came about when the war hit. And porn was brought back to America when we had a lot of soldiers going off overseas and encountering these images, encountering these cultures, and having a spark of life with them, having a spark of curiosity and imagination. And porn comes back to the United States, and it takes on an entirely different container. And it's produced in a very different way than it was ever produced in its origins, and it is sold in a different way that it was produced. And I am very, very concerned with anyone who has domination over any distribution channel. I think it's very important to look at who has control over the distribution channels of our news and the news that we're seeing. We need to take a look and say, how many people own our newspapers? How many people own our television stations? Distribution channels can never be in the hands of just one individual or one corporate interest. And we have to always be on guard anytime someone has complete control over anything that we're watching, even the most seemingly mundane forms of our media. I also do think it's interesting that the greatest way to, the way that all these amazing, thriving cultures that were so deeply influential and inspiring for me to look at, especially as a queer identified individual, to sit there and see something in black and white that was whimsical, that was dynamic, that had hardcore penetrative sex, but also had men interacting with men and women in the same image. It broadened my horizons, and it gave me the power to realize that I could create my own images, that I could put them on film, and I could offer them up for consideration to somebody else to look at for entertainment and for fantasy. And when I make those images, once again, what I am creating is a form of entertainment. I would never advise anyone, for instance, take any of their driving cues from Bullet or Fast and the Furious. And I don't think anyone seriously does. But we do have a moment of thrill and excitement when we watch those images. If you watch, Bullet, that chase scene through San Francisco is incredible. And Fast and the Furious, when you watch that, you can almost have the feeling. You can almost hear the engine. You can almost feel it. And I think that's an incredible experience. And you get through the end of it and you say, that was great. And you might think about driving a little bit more, but hopefully no one's driving. They go to Fast and the Furious and no one's operating their moving vehicles like that. It's not a driver's ed film.
Well,
it's entertainment.
Let me just intervene for a minute, because I want to get Carolyn back in here, and then I want to sort of go back to Maggie and Gail. I may be wrong about this, but Maggie, what I'm basically hearing is that the work you do is always liberating. It's always sort of moving toward a greater liberation of the self and a greater mastery of the self and greater agency, right? And what I'm hearing from Gail is, actually, that's not possible. That's an illusion.
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
Because you asked a question about authenticity and agency. Let me sort of answer that position. Let me say that I don't know what an authentic sexuality looks like for you. I know what it looks like for me, right? Because anything authentic grows out of your own historical being, your peer group, your religion, I don't know, whatever it is. It's your own experiences, and out of that grows an authenticity that makes sense to you. As I said before in the lecture I gave before, if I was coming in to talk about the fast food industry and the destruction of the food industry, of the climate, would people say to me, well, if I don't eat the fast food, give me recipes to make at home. I don't know what to do. Well, actually, I don't know what you like to eat. I can't give you a prescription of what to eat if you're not going to eat fast food. Well, I can't do that for pornography. I don't know who you are. I don't know what is authentic to you and what makes sense. So one's authentic sexuality is, you're right, very particular to your own constellation of experiences. However, we have this word agency branded around all the time. We need to deconstruct that, because I argue that agency is ultimately an empirical question. It is a question that one can investigate regarding one's economic situation, one's race, one's gender, one's sexuality. It is a question that requires investigation. And I use myself as an example here, and my incredible amount of unbelievable agency that I have so much of I don't know what to do. As I said, it's just so much. I've got class, I've got race, not so much gender, but I've got so much agency in my life. And I want to tell you, when these women come in and clean Yale University at 6 o'clock at night after we leave, my agency don't mean shit for them, right? The fact that me, Miss White, middle class, educated, so what we're going to say, we're going to build a theory of my agency based on people who are of colour and are poor. It's a ludicrous argument. So when I see white feminist, professors arguing about agency, yes, we've got a shitload of agency. I completely agree. But how dare we, in our positions of agency, speak to people whose lives we can't even begin to understand? What does it mean that poor people have 3 jobs between 2 people? What does it mean that the mothers have to go to a second shift? What does any of this mean? And what does it mean, the fact that women who work in the sex industry are drawn overwhelmingly from the poor class, from people of colour, from all of these things? So when we talk about agency, we have to empiricize what this means. That's a critical thing. I don't know anything about you, Maggie. I don't know your life. Maybe this is what you're doing. I don't know, and maybe it works for you. That could very be. I'll grant you that. What I'm arguing is that that's not got much to say in terms of the fact that we live with the global porn industry breathing down our neck. And Maggie, whether she exists or not, and whether there's lots of Maggies, it's not going to change that reality. And unless we deal with that reality, we're missing the boat around the notion of sexuality. Yeah.
But I don't think that having listened to your lecture, having read your book, I don't think that you would actually be happy with like the unionization of sex work. And so if we brought these women that you're talking about who are poor and have little opportunity and are working 2 jobs, and we unionize them, and they continue to work, let's say they worked in prostitution or they worked in pornography, and they were paid decent union wages with medical benefits and all this, I still think you would think it was a terrible...
Can I answer that why?
Because terrible
we have
industry.
data from Germany who did, for example, unionize prostitutes. Right? We know for a fact that it increased trafficking by 70%. We know that women did not sign up for free healthcare and everything else. Let me say why, what I think is really important here. When they ask women in the sex industry, this is mainly in prostitution, but also in the sex industry, what do you want? They never say to make it legal and unionize. You know what they say? We want out. We want job training. We want drug and alcohol rehabilitation. We want safe housing. They're very, very clear. This was a study done in 7 different countries, going across the globe, asking women, what do you want? This notion of unionising as if that will make things better. Right, and I was just in Australia, and they've also unionised prostitution. And you know what was so interesting? As I was leaving, the headlines in the paper was that it's going through a recession in Australia. What do you think the first thing they're cutting? Healthcare to prostitutes. That was the first thing they're going to cut. Because, of course, who gives a shit about prostitutes? So I don't care what they say about unionising it and that. When they have to make government cuts, the first thing that goes is because nobody gives a shit for these women. And these women themselves do not want unions. They want out of the sex industry. And that's what I support. So, no, I would not support unionisation.
Okay. I wonder if I could turn the conversation a little bit, because we keep going to the macro level.
I'm actually sorry, we need to do another event with Maggie in 20 minutes, so if we could wrap it up in the next 5 minutes or something.
Oh, okay. That's fine.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. Would you like me to wrap it up now? Or how about if each of the speakers made a closing statement at this point?
That'd be great.
Okay? All right. Maggie?
I have to say that I think unionization is a very big thing, and there was a very key phrase that I just heard, we unionize the women. No unionization effort can ever be successful unless it comes from the workers themselves. It's something that has to be done, it has to be fought for, and part of what I do is to go and talk to performers and to talk to sex workers. My life's work has been with HIV prevention, and I do work with sex workers on the street, in homeless shelters, at every level of society. And I've done a lot, and I would say that it is not true that sex workers are asking to get out of the industry. A lot of times what sex workers are looking for is rights, not rescue. We are looking for support, and to say no one gives a shit about sex workers, I agree, and I say that is unacceptable, and that my goal is to sit here and say it is time to start caring about sex workers, and maybe people don't, but I'm Maggie Mayhem, and that's what I'm here to change in the world.
Carolyn?
I think that we are never going to eradicate pornography. If history tells us anything, there is a tremendous amount of desire to use that type of material. We're never going to eradicate it. So I think that the answer for concerned citizens like yourselves who have come to this panel is in media literacy and in education. And if you're here because you have a roommate who uses pornography constantly and it bothers you, then really try to have a conversation with that person about what he or she is getting from that pornography. What is the takeaway for that person? What are they missing in other aspects of their life that maybe could be, that could be substituted for some of that pornography use? If you're in a marriage where your spouse is using pornography and it makes you feel belittled and small, as it does many spouses, have a conversation with your spouse about what else you could, what experiences you could be part of together that would take the place of some of that pornography, or maybe find other kinds of more positive erotica that you could use together that would that could strengthen that could strengthen your relationship. Or if it's unacceptable to you, then walk away from it. But I think we're never going to be rid of it. So find ways to live your life positively. And if this material is influencing your life, either talk to the people in your life who are bringing it in, or step away and change your life.
Okay, Gail, and then I have a 2-second clip.
I just say, I understand your position, but if we thought that you can't get rid of things and then you have to learn to live with them, do you know what world we'd be living in? We'd be living in a world of slavery. We'd be living in a world where children still get mangled in machines. You have to keep always, as the civil rights movement said, your eyes on the prize. And I, as an activist, could not tolerate for 1 minute to think that the very best my activism could ever aim to be was to learn to maneuver around pornography. That's not, for me, an activist life. I have to keep my mind on the fact that we as human beings deserve to live a life of integrity, of dignity, free from fear, free from economic want, all of those things. And I think we will. If we get rid of pornography, I think then it will require also getting rid of all other forms of oppression. But ending to say that for those of you who do have boyfriends who use pornography, as I said, if you won't stop and you still insist, get rid of the fucker, move on, find someone else, because you should not settle for having to have men in your life who constantly get their sexuality from an industry that basically disrespects and degrades women. You deserve more, and you know what? He also deserves more, actually. But if he's not going to listen to you, then you get the hell out of there. And women, and this sort of idea of a charm circle of heterosexuality, it's not so charming. And women need to fight back against men and refuse to be taken advantage of in this way. So that would be my argument.
Okay, I want to thank the panelists, and I want to leave you with one point. I will finally come out around where I am with this, which is I actually don't believe in giving the state any more power over you than you can possibly avoid. And one of the things we actually know about anti-pornography laws in the United States is that they laid the groundwork for a whole series of anti-terrorism laws that are now, in fact, being used to restrict our civil liberties. And I say that not to put myself in opposition to Gail's position, but to say that there are a great many things at stake when we ask the state to regulate us. And we have to be very, very careful. In Toronto, where they did pass the McKinnon-Dworkin law, it isn't a law, it's an ordinance. The first businesses to go were lesbian bookstores.
I think you've abused your position here. I have to tell you, I really do. I think this is an abuse of your position. I'm going to tell you why. Because you have the last word.
They have to take
no, but you have the last word. And to have set up like that with this position and not have allowed me with a very particular position to have argued against it and to leave them with what I think is factually incorrect data about what happened in Canada, that I think is...
Would you like another 2 minutes?
It is absolutely factually correct what happened in Canada. The very first material
that is
caught
true.
up at the border under the Butler law with Andrea Dworkin's work.
Yes, no, hold on. But the Butler law was not taking the Dworkin-McKinnon legislation. It took the definition. It was a criminal law, and Dworkin-McKinnon was written in the civil code. So there's a whole discussion, but that's not the issue. The issue is, I don't think, as wrapping it up, you should have just sat that in the middle of the room here. That would have been a good discussion to have in the whole idea of the state. But I think as a moderator, it really wasn't your job to lead with a political position like that, which couldn't have been negotiated.
Well, I take your criticism in a civil and respectful manner, and I thank you for it. And I think we have to wrap up now.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you all for coming to this event, and as you can see, we've only begun to scratch the surface this conversation, and because it's such an important part of whether maybe it's not your personal sexual life or intimate life, it could be one of your peers. So as you can see, we have some very hardworking scholars and activists who still disagree in a civil format on a roundtable panel on this lovely stage in LC. And I encourage you to take back the conversation to your dorm rooms and with your friends and your peers, because it's a conversation that isn't often had, and I think that there was a lot of material to think about for the future. And I'm sure that you will come up with as many voices as is in
And finally, please come to more events. We'd love to see you again. Sexweek2012.org/calendar, and also like us on Facebook. All right.